Gordon Parks' groundbreaking 1969 film wasn't just Hollywood's first major studio movie directed by a black filmmaker. It's packed with bizarre behind-the-scenes secrets. From a producer who accidentally pitched the wrong book to circus animals that wandered onto set, discover the strange, true stories behind this cinematic landmark that most film fans have never heard. Fact 1. The wrong book sealed the deal. When filmmaker John Cassavetes decided to help his friend Gordon Parks break into Hollywood directing, he made what seemed like a catastrophic mistake. In early 1968, Cassavetes arranged a crucial meeting between Parks and Kenneth Hyman, the head of production at Warner Brothers 7 Arts. But there was one problem. Cassavetes accidentally handed Hyman a copy of Parks' 1966 memoir, A Choice of Weapons, instead of the novel they were supposed to be pitching, The Learning Tree. This wasn't a small mix-up. The two books were completely different. One was a memoir about Parks' life experiences, while the other was the semi-autobiographical novel about growing up in Kansas that they actually wanted to turn into a film. Despite this blunder, something remarkable happened. Hyman was so impressed by what he read and by Parks' reputation as Life magazine's groundbreaking photographer that he didn't care about the confusion. Within just 15 minutes of their meeting, Hyman offered Parks not just the opportunity to direct The Learning Tree, but an incredible 4-picture deal with the studio. This was extraordinary for any first-time film director, but especially for an African-American director in 1968 Hollywood. Parks would later recall that Cassavetes had to leave the meeting early because he and Hyman weren't on good terms at the time, leaving Parks to negotiate the deal independently. The wrong book accidentally became the right introduction, and what could have been an embarrassing mistake instead opened the door for Parks to become the first black director of a major Hollywood studio film. Fact 2. Star Trek's Secret Connection. The young actor who portrayed Newt Winger, the main character in The Learning Tree, had a mother who was making her own groundbreaking history on television at the exact same time. Kyle Johnson, who was just 16 years old when he played the 14-year-old protagonist, was the son of actress Nichelle Nichols. Nichols had already become a cultural icon by 1968 as Lieutenant Nyota Uhura on the original Star Trek series, which had premiered in 1966. She was one of the first black women to play a major role in a primetime television show, and her presence on Star Trek was so significant that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself reportedly convinced her not to leave the series. So while Nichelle Nichols was breaking barriers on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise every week on television screens across America, her son Kyle was making his own mark in cinema history as the lead in Hollywood's first major studio film, directed by an African American. Johnson's parents, Nichelle Nichols and Foster Johnson, had divorced the same year Kyle was born in 1951. Interestingly, Kyle began his acting career somewhat by accident. His mother took him to an audition as a form of punishment, but the director saw him and immediately cast him in the production. This unexpected start eventually led him to the role that would define his career. The parallel achievements of mother and son represented a powerful moment in the broader struggle for black representation in entertainment during the Civil Rights era. Fact 3. The screen tests were a deception. Kyle Johnson went through what he later described as an extremely unusual audition process that left him confused and frustrated. After meeting Gordon Parks at the Beverly Hills Hotel for about half an hour, Johnson heard nothing definitive about whether he had the role. Then he got a call from his agent saying Warner Brothers wanted him for a screen test with actress Estelle Evans, who would play his mother in the film. He completed the test, received a polite thank you from Parks, and went home thinking he was still competing for the part. A week later, another call came. They wanted him back for a second screen test, this time with actress Mira Waters, who would play his girlfriend, Arcella. Same routine. He did the scene, Parks thanked him, and sent him home. Then came a third screen test with actor Joel Flewellen, who would play his uncle. By the time his agent called with news of a fourth screen test, Johnson was becoming exasperated, wondering why Parks couldn't make up his mind. After that fourth audition, he tried to put the whole thing out of his mind. Then came the call that truly baffled him. His agent informed him that production would begin in September and he needed to leave for Kansas. Johnson responded, "Shooting what? What are you talking about?" Nobody had actually told him he had been cast. It was only later that Parks revealed the truth. Johnson had gotten the part after that very first meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel. All 4 screen tests weren't to evaluate Johnson at all. Parks had been using him to gauge the chemistry and abilities of the other actors who would appear alongside him in the film. Fact 4. A real circus crashed the movie. When Gordon Parks and his film crew arrived in Fort Scott, Kansas in the fall of 1968 to begin shooting The Learning Tree, they discovered something unexpected happening in town. A traveling circus had set up operations at the exact same time production was scheduled to begin. Rather than seeing this as a scheduling conflict or a potential distraction, Parks made a creative decision that perfectly captured his practical approach to filmmaking. Instead of constructing an elaborate set to recreate a circus scene as outlined in the script, Parks simply incorporated the real circus that was already in town. The film's circus sequence features actual circus performers doing their acts, along with genuine Fort Scott residents who had come out to watch the circus and found themselves becoming movie extras without really planning on it. Actor Kyle Johnson later remembered this detail specifically when recalling his experience making the film. This wasn't just a convenient cost-saving measure. It gave the scene an authentic quality that a Hollywood recreation might have lacked. The real spectators, the actual circus tents, and the genuine performers all contributed to the film's documentary-like feel that Parks, coming from his background as a Life magazine photojournalist, knew how to capture so effectively. It was a perfect example of Parks following his instincts while filming, something he encouraged his actors to do as well. This spontaneous adaptation to circumstances reflected Parks's flexible directing style and his ability to recognize when reality could serve his story better than carefully controlled artificial staging. The circus sequence remains a memorable part of the film, enriched by its unexpected authenticity. Fact 5. The legendary cinematographer wanted to learn. Burnett Guffey was already a Hollywood legend when Gordon Parks approached him about shooting The Learning Tree. Guffey had won Academy Awards for his cinematography on From Here to Eternity in 1953 and Bonnie and Clyde in 1967. He was a master of both black and white and color photography, and his work on Bonnie and Clyde had essentially created a new visual style for period films. By 1968, Guffey had entered retirement, having already accomplished more than most cinematographers could dream of achieving in their careers. But when Gordon Parks asked him to come out of retirement to shoot The Learning Tree, Guffey agreed, and his reason for accepting the job was startling. On the behind-the-scenes features for the film's later releases, Guffey explained that he took the assignment because he wanted to learn camera style from Gordon Parks. Think about that for a moment. An Oscar-winning cinematographer with decades of experience wanted to study technique from a first-time film director. But Parks wasn't just any rookie director. He was one of the greatest photographers of the 20th century, the first African-American staff photographer for Life magazine, and someone whose images had defined how Americans saw themselves for decades. His photographic eye was so sophisticated, his understanding of light and composition so masterful that even Hollywood's best cinematographer recognized he could learn something from Parks. This mutual respect between the two men resulted in some of the most visually stunning sequences in late 60s cinema, with The Learning Tree showcasing both Guffey's technical expertise and Parks' artistic vision working in perfect harmony. Fact 6. A producer offered $75,000 to whitewash it. Gordon Parks spent 5 years trying to get The Learning Tree made into a film after his novel was published in 1963. During that long development period, various producers and studios showed interest in optioning the book, but many wanted to change fundamental aspects of the story. 2 independent producers initially acquired the film rights but couldn't raise the necessary funding to actually make the movie. Then came an offer that revealed just how deeply racism was embedded in Hollywood's business practices. According to contemporary reports, one producer approached Parks with what seemed like a generous proposal: $75,000 to adapt the screenplay from his own novel. That was a substantial amount of money in the 1960s, especially for a first-time screenwriter. But there was one non-negotiable condition attached to this offer. The producer insisted that Parks would have to rewrite all the black characters in the story as white people. The producer essentially wanted Parks to strip away the entire racial context and experience that made The Learning Tree meaningful and authentic. Parks refused without hesitation. He had written The Learning Tree as a semi-autobiographical account of growing up as an African American in Kansas during the 1920s, and transforming those characters into white people would have been a complete betrayal of the story's purpose and his own life experiences. This incident demonstrates the obstacles Parks faced before John Cassavetes finally connected him with Kenneth Hyman at Warner Brothers 7 Arts, who understood that the authentic black experience was exactly what made the project valuable, not something that needed to be erased. Fact 7. Locals thought it was pornography. When the film crew arrived in Fort Scott, Kansas to begin production in late September of 1968, they immediately encountered hostility from local residents. Contemporary reports from Variety magazine initially suggested the problem stemmed from racial tension. After all, the crew included 6 African American members, which later reports corrected to actually be 12 black crew members. But a follow-up article in Variety from June of 1969 revealed a more absurd explanation for the initial resistance. Fort Scott residents had somehow gotten the idea that The Learning Tree was going to be what they called a dirty film, essentially pornography. Nobody seems to know exactly how this rumor started, or why townspeople would assume Gordon Parks was coming to their community to shoot an adult film, but the misunderstanding created real production problems. The tension only dissipated after the mayor and local officials stepped in to clarify what the film was actually about, and more importantly, to explain the economic benefits that hosting a major Hollywood production would bring. To Fort Scott businesses, once residents understood that Warner Brothers was paying for hotel rooms, meals, equipment rentals, and hiring local extras, their attitude changed dramatically. People who had been suspicious or hostile suddenly wanted to participate. Gordon Parks later commented that shooting in Fort Scott eventually worked out well once everyone understood what was really happening. The whole incident revealed both the lingering racial prejudices in Parks's hometown and the bizarre assumptions that could arise in a small Kansas town when Hollywood came calling. Fact 8. The Elks Club integrated for one night. One of the most significant moments during the production of The Learning Tree happened off-camera and demonstrated the film's immediate impact on Fort Scott, Kansas. The local Elks Club, like many fraternal organizations in America during the 1960s, maintained a policy of racial segregation. African Americans were simply not allowed to enter the club as members or guests. This had been the club's policy for its entire history. But when Warner Brothers 7 Arts decided to throw a party for the cast and crew of The Learning Tree, they chose the Fort Scott Elks Club as the venue. For the first time ever, the Elks Club admitted African American guests through its doors. This wasn't just a few people. The party included the film's black actors like Kyle Johnson, Estelle Evans, and Alex Clark, plus the 12 African American crew members who had worked on the production. According to reports from the time, the integration happened specifically for this party celebrating the film. While it would be nice to report that this single event permanently changed the club's membership policies, the historical record doesn't confirm whether the Elks Club continued to admit black members after the production wrapped. What is documented is that for at least one night in 1968, the rigid color barrier that had defined this institution collapsed because of Gordon Parks and his film. It was a small but symbolically powerful moment that showed how Parks' presence in Fort Scott was forcing his hometown to confront its own racial practices, even in unexpected ways, like a simple rap party. Fact 9. Parks got revenge on his racist teacher, Gordon. Parks never forgot Miss McClintock, the high school teacher in Fort Scott who crushed the college dreams of her black students. During Parks's time at Fort Scott High School, McClintock taught a class where she told Parks and other African American students something devastating. She advised them not to waste their parents' money on college because black students aren't college material and would inevitably end up working as porters and maids regardless of their education. She genuinely believed she was giving practical advice, but her words reflected the racist assumptions that limited opportunities for black Americans. Rather than accepting this verdict, Parks later said that McClintock's discouragement actually motivated him. He wanted to prove her wrong, and prove her wrong he certainly did. Parks left Fort Scott and eventually became one of the most accomplished artists of the 20th century. A groundbreaking photographer, a published novelist, a film director, a composer, and a poet. Universities began offering him honorary doctorate degrees in recognition of his contributions to American culture. By the time Parks received his 30th honorary doctorate, he made a point of dedicating it publicly to Miss McClintock and the school counselor who had told him not to pursue higher education. It was a gesture that mixed grace with a pointed reminder of how wrong they had been. Parks didn't stop at 30 degrees. He eventually received over 50 honorary doctorates throughout his lifetime. In July of 2003, a delegation from Fort Scott traveled to New York and presented Parks with an actual high school diploma from Fort Scott High School, 77 years after Miss McClintock told him he had no future. Fact at 10. The executive producer vanished from credits. William Conrad was a respected figure in Hollywood, an actor best known for his distinctive voice work and his role as the original Marshal Matt Dillon on the radio version of Gunsmoke, as well as a producer with considerable experience. Throughout the entire production of The Learning Tree, Conrad worked in the capacity of executive producer, helping shepherd the project through Warner Brothers' 7 Arts and providing guidance to first-time director Gordon Parks. His contributions were significant and tangible. He was present during the shoot, involved in production decisions, and actively helping to ensure the film got made. But when the film was released in August of 1969, anyone looking at the credits would find no mention of William Conrad anywhere. His name had been completely removed from the film. Variety magazine reported on this unusual decision in June of 1969, and the following week they published the explanation. Conrad had voluntarily asked that his name be taken off the credits, and his reasoning was both generous and politically astute. He felt that The Learning Tree was fundamentally Gordon's story, both literally since it was based on Parks's life and symbolically as the first major studio film directed by an African American. Conrad believed that Parks deserved to receive full credit for the achievement, without sharing the spotlight with a white executive producer who would diminish the historic nature of what Parks had accomplished. This wasn't about Conrad hiding his involvement due to any problems with the production, quite the opposite. It was a deliberate choice to ensure that Gordon Parks would be properly recognized as the driving force behind this groundbreaking film. Fact 11. Warner Brothers sent spies to the set. Gordon Parks was making history as the first African American to direct a major Hollywood studio film, but Warner Brothers' 7 Arts apparently wasn't entirely comfortable with the risk they had taken. Throughout the production, studio executives from Warner Brothers made frequent visits to the Fort Scott, Kansas location and later to the Burbank studio lot where interior scenes were filmed. These weren't casual drop-ins or the normal level of studio oversight that any production might experience. According to reports from the time, Warner Brothers specifically sent representatives to check on Parks and to make sure that production was running smoothly. The explicit reason given for this heightened scrutiny was that Parks was an African American director. The studio didn't trust that a black man, even one as accomplished as Gordon Parks, could handle a major film production without constant monitoring. This was particularly insulting given that Parks had been given an extraordinary level of creative control. He was not only directing, but also producing, writing the screenplay, and composing the musical score. He was essentially running the entire show, yet the studio felt compelled to watch him more closely than they would have watched a white director with the same responsibilities. Ironically, Parks proved to be remarkably efficient. His background in photojournalism and his practice of following his instincts while filming meant that scenes were often shot in very few takes. Actor Kyle Johnson later described the production as a tight-run ship, a well-oiled machine, where everyone understood their role and worked together seamlessly. The studio's surveillance said more about Hollywood's racial prejudices than it did about Parks's capabilities. Fact 12. It broke down. Decades of discrimination in 15 minutes. Gordon Parks reflected on the meeting that changed his life with a sense of wonder that never quite faded. After years of being told that black people could only work in front of the camera as actors, never behind it as directors or producers or department heads, Parks found himself sitting across from Kenneth Hyman, the president of Warner Brothers 7 Arts. Hyman had been given Parks' work by John Cassavetes, though as we know now, it was accidentally the wrong book. But Hyman was familiar with Parks' photography and knew his reputation. The meeting itself was almost shockingly brief, just 15 minutes from start to finish. In that quarter hour, Hyman offered Parks not only the opportunity to direct The Learning Tree, but also to write the screenplay, produce the film, and compose the score. It was an unprecedented level of creative control for any first-time director, let alone an African-American one in 1968. Parks later tried to capture the profound significance of that moment. He said that until just a few years before this meeting, black people didn't even dream about getting into movies except as actors. It was, in his words, a closed world sealed off being discrimination. The barriers had been so complete and so long-standing that aspiring behind-the-scenes work in Hollywood hadn't even seemed like a realistic possibility worth hoping for. But then this 15-minute conversation happened, and suddenly everything changed. Parks noted the almost absurd speed of the transformation. All those years of prejudice and bigotry were broken down in 15 minutes. It was both a testament to Hyman's vision and a bitter reminder of how arbitrary the exclusion had always been. Fact 13. First 25 films ever preserved. In 1988, the United States Congress passed the National Film Preservation Act in response to growing concerns about films being altered through colorization of black and white movies and pan and scan modifications of widescreen images. The law established the National Film Preservation Board within the Library of Congress, with a mission to select films deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant for permanent preservation. In September of 1989, Librarian of Congress James Billington announced the very first selections for what would become the National Film Registry, an inaugural class of just 25 films that would represent the beginning of this preservation effort. This first group of 25 films had to essentially represent all of American cinema history up to that point. The list included undisputed masterpieces like Citizen Kane from 1941, Casablanca from 1942, and The Maltese Falcon from 1941. It included silent classics like The General from 1926 and Intolerance from 1916. It included Gone with the Wind from 1939 and The Wizard of Oz from the same year. And right there alongside these iconic titles was The Learning Tree from 1969. At the time, Billington emphasized that this was not a best of list, but rather an attempt to represent the diversity and significance of American film history. The Learning Tree was the only film on that inaugural list directed by an African American, and its inclusion signaled the registry's commitment to honoring films that represented diverse perspectives and experiences, not just the traditional canon of Hollywood classics. Fact 14. The original title was Learn Baby, Learn. When Gordon Parks and Warner Brothers 7 Arts first began developing the film adaptation of Parks' novel, they worked under a different title than what eventually appeared in theaters. The working title throughout the early stages of production was Learn Baby, Learn. This catchier, more contemporary-sounding title reflected the linguistic style of the late 1960s, with its rhythmic repetition similar to phrases popular in that era. According to Turner Classic Movies and Production Records, this was the name attached to the project in trade publications and internal studio documents as the film moved toward production in 1968. However, at some point before the film's release, Parks and the studio decided to change course and use the same title as the original novel, The Learning Tree. This title carried much more weight and significance because it came directly from a pivotal moment in Parks' story. In both the book and the film, there's a scene where Newt Winger, the protagonist, has a conversation with his mother Sarah about the town where they live, Cherokee Flats, which is the fictionalized version of Parks' real hometown of Fort Scott, Kansas. Sarah tells her son about the nature of their hometown, that it contains both good people and bad people, just like the fruit on a tree, where some is sweet and some is rotten. She advises Newt to think of Cherokee Flats as his learning tree, a place where he can learn from both the positive and negative experiences, the good and bad people, and carry those lessons with him wherever life takes him. This metaphor became central to understanding Parks' philosophy about how we grow from all our experiences. Fact 15. Warner Brothers hired its first black electrician, Gordon Parks, fought to include African-American crew members on the learning tree despite facing resistance from Hollywood's labor unions, which in his words were all white at the time. Parks later told the New York Times in August of 1969 that hiring black technicians required a battle, though he acknowledged receiving enormous cooperation from Warner Brothers in supporting his efforts. The studio needed to convince the unions to make exceptions to their de facto exclusionary practices. Among the 12 African-American crew members Parks ultimately hired was an electrician named Gene Simpson. According to the Los Angeles Sentinel in March of 1969, Simpson's hiring represented a historic first. Warner Brothers had never employed a black electrician in the studio's entire history, which stretched back to 1923. The studio had produced hundreds of films over more than 4 decades without ever having an African-American work as an electrician on any production. Gene Simpson broke that barrier specifically because of Gordon Parks' insistence on creating opportunities for black craftspeople in the technical positions that had been systematically closed to them. The film also employed Vincent Tubbs, a publicist who was notably the only black union head in Hollywood at that time, serving as president of the Hollywood Publicists Guild. Additionally, Parks brought his own son, Gordon Parks Jr., onto the production as the still photographer. Box Office magazine reported that 7 African-American craftsmen worked on the film in total, though other sources counted 12 when including all departments, making The Learning Tree one of the most integrated Hollywood productions of its era.